Thank you for joining us today. I am Nicole, you are in for an exciting treat. Today, Vince will be concluding his studies in Isaiah 55. I've been looking forward to this particular lesson. We will predominantly be focusing on the trees of the field in verses 12 and 13. I can't wait to learn about the literal understanding of the trees. I think you will be amazed. This lesson is entitled, What Tree Are You? Well, let's get it going.
Oh, I'm Vince. I hope you're having a good day, and I want to thank you for joining me. If you'll notice, put up there, there is activity with God's Word. Now, that's the idea behind the water. When the woman that was at the well in John 4 with Jesus was told by Jesus that she wanted the living water that he had to offer, what he was basically talking about was the word of God being given and then the activity behind it, the workings of God being behind it. Well, we found that in Isaiah 55, the first few verses up front, that there was an invite to Israel. And they were told to come to the waters. And they were told if they did, they would get life. And they had the promise of an everlasting covenant. But something happened by the time we got to verse 6 in the same chapter. There was an urgent cry that went out. Isaiah, speaking about 2,700 years ago, was shouting out, Seek the Lord while he may be found. And the reason for that is because of verse 5. There are certain fulfillments that need to be fulfilled. And when they are going to be fulfilled, time has run out for Israel if they have not yet responded. One of those things that is talked about starting during the resurrection of Jesus on the day of Pentecost. Israel was called then to go out and call a nation they did not know. We know that nation is the church. Furthermore, they were told in the prophecy that other nations who do not know Israel will run to them. Now, the church age will be over before these other nations that don't know Israel run to them. It has to happen before the end of the age. This happens after something else happens in verse 5 that has not yet been fulfilled, and that these nations run to them because of the Lord their God. Of course, Jesus is back now. How do we know that? Because he was glorifying Israel, and at that time, all Israel will be saved. The mountains and the hills. What are the mountains and the hills? Well, let's look at Isaiah's verse here. And the 12b, what it says is the mountains and the hills shall break forth in the singing before you. Now we know mountains don't sing. We know hills don't sing. We could kind of hear the wind whistling through them sometime, but they don't sing. So what is being talked about? Under Isaiah, a very scholarly prophet, is speaking in metaphors. He's using symbolism, it's poetry. He wants to make it sound good. And the people of his day, quite honestly, would have understood what he was talking about. Now, we have other verses we could look to, but I'm going to take you to Isaiah 2:2. And it says, Now it will come about that in the last days the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains. It's the chief of the mountains in the last days, and will be raised above all the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. What you're seeing here is things are in transition. What Isaiah is talking about, the number one kingdom of the world, the mountain is a kingdom, okay? A hill is a nation, or they could be small kingdoms or small nations, but that's what they are. They are the mountains are the kingdom, and the hills are generally the nations. It's saying that it will be chief among the kingdoms. There will be no other kingdom that was like it ever before. And now in Israel, Israel becomes the dominant kingdom over the world. So mountains and hills are kingdoms and nations. Then we go back and look at the verse and we can understand why they shall break forth in singing. Keep it in mind now, these guys, many of them were out to crush Israel. They were going to destroy the people of Israel. But how fast things change. I guess if you can't beat them, right, you join them. And that is actually what's happening here. They're breaking forth into singing because they're celebrating. The way things were is no longer going to be that way. They are going to be different. You hear that cheering? Isn't that exciting? People are celebrating. They're clapping for Israel. All the trees of the field will clap their hands. We find that in Isaiah 55:12. It says, all the trees of the field will clap their hands. Trees clap. Hands, right. Sure. Actually, the trees of the field are people here. Again, in the poetry here, we find people described as trees throughout the Bible. You'll find it in Judges 9 and Zechariah 9 and 11. You'll find it in Micah 4:1. You'll find it in Zechariah 4 and Romans 11. They're always talking about individuals, and sometimes it could be a group of individuals within that Cree category. So what we have here is we have people clapping their hands. But who are these people? Well, according to Matthew 13:38, these are the people of the world because it defines the field there as the world. Clapping, yes, celebrating, they're clapping. Yep, and like we stated, no more Satan. Yes, things are different. There's a lot of reasons to be celebrating at this particular point. You'll also find some good parallelisms in First Chronicles 16, 28 through 20, I'm sorry, 28 through 33, if you want to go and check it out. Okay, let's take a look at Isaiah 55:13 and see what we get out of this. Now, we're starting to talk about trees here. And these trees that are mentioned here are very important of this chapter because they're going to validate verse 5. What it says is instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress tree, instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle tree. And it shall be to the Lord for a name, for an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. You see already there's 4 trees here. And as we study trees, sometime I'd like to ask the question, what tree are you? Well, you may be one of these trees that are mentioned here. Well, let's see about these specific trees, what the Lord is trying to tell us. We notice a word in verse 13, the word everlasting. It was also mentioned in verse 3 of this chapter. That is a very important word because it is an inclusio. It's something that holds the context together. So, what the chapter is about really is about how someone receives the everlasting covenant and also what it means to the Lord. Over here in this verse, he talks about it being an everlasting sign. What is happening here, it's something that is going to be a reminder to the Lord that he has an everlasting covenant that cannot be changed with the nation of Israel. So these trees are symbolic of the fulfillment of this event in the entirety of the chapter. And that chapter is what needs to be fulfilled at the end of the chapter is what's going to validate the chapter. And that is the presence of some trees and the lack of presence of other trees. Now, one of the signs here is the fact that what's not present is the thorn and the briar. Again, trees represent people. And specifically, he is talking here about the people of Israel. So the fact that thorns and briars are not there, it's saying that there's certain people that were once part of Israel are no longer going to be present. So instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress tree. So it is going to be replaced by another tree, which we will get to shortly. Now, how do we know what the thorn is? The thorn is described as the rebellious in Ezekiel 2, verses 4 and 6. I'm going to read it real quick, but we really want to get through this because this is a little bit of a detailed study. But here's what it says. I'm sending you to them. So he's sending Ezekiel to the nation of Israel, who are stubborn and obstinate children. And you shall say to them, thus says the Lord God. As for them, whether they listen or not, for they are a rebellious house, okay? A rebellious house. The thorn is rebellious. And how do we know? He's going to tell us that here. They will know that a prophet has been amongst them. And you, son of man, neither fear them not, nor fear their words. Though thistles and thorns are with you, and you sit on scorpions, neither fear their words, nor be dismayed at their presence, for they are a rebellious house. So, see what we're doing is we're taking a Bible verse and we're looking at at least one Bible verse. It's always better if we can find more to interpret within the context the symbolisms of thistles and thorns. They represent the rebellious. Okay, the briar is also not present. So, what does this tell us? Well, let's read Isaiah 55:13, the part that mentions it. Instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle. The one sign is the briar is not going to be there anymore. That somewhere in one of the next slides, the myrtle tree is going to be there, and it will be explained then. Now, the briar. What does the briar tell us? Well, if we look at Micah 7:3 and 4a, it says, concerning evil, both hands do it well. The prince asks, and also the judge for a bribe. And a great man speaks the desire of his soul. So they weave it together. The best of them is like a briar. What he's showing here is people that are in cahoots that are doing evil within the nation of Israel. And this is very important because, see, when we get to the end of the age and Israel is in the land, what you're going to have is no one that is of Israel that does evil anymore. That briar tree, that evil person or persons are no longer going to be there. Let's talk a little bit about the trees that are going to be there. No thorns, no rebellious, no briars, none that have their hands in evil. But there are some trees here, believe it or not, that were present in Israel or outside of Israel that did evil but no longer do it. And these are the other two trees that are mentioned. So the thorn now is not going to be present, but the cypress tree is going to be present, and they are a reminder. They are a reminder. Sometimes the cypress tree are also called fir trees, depending on translation of the Bible. And they did evil too. These were idolaters in the Bible. And how do we know they were idolaters? In this context, we have to say they're ex-idolaters. Why do we say that? Well, let's look at the scriptures that support it. In Zechariah 11:2, it says, wail, O cypress, for the cedar has fallen, because the glorious trees have been destroyed. Wail, O oaks of Bashan. Now, the cedar, you'll find that also in Zechariah chapter 9, at the beginning of the chapter, is a political. These are a person. These are the leaders of Israel. These are the ones that people depend on to do things right. The problem was in the past, they were always leading Israel astray. And the cypress trees were those that followed. They not only idolized the people that were above them, but they followed their idols. The same with the oaks. The oaks were the people of power, they were the people that had clout. So these two groups, kind of one influenced the cedar, the politics, the other ones went along with it. So what was their idolatry in? Well, it was in a lot of things because we know after the exile, where Zechariah is now speaking, it wasn't a big problem in Israel anymore. They weren't so much idolaters in pagan gods, but they were still idolizing other things. But that changed. Maybe they were idolizing, men, putting their trust in men. Maybe they were idolizing, putting their trust in things like resources, money. We have it today. People put their trust in power. People follow certain groups of people they think can do things for them. We noticed that it was no different in the days of Israel. So we have our cypresses around today too. But in Hosea 14:8, it said, Ephraim shall say, so it's the tribe here talking, what have I to do anymore with idols? Do you see it? They're letting go of their idols. They're not continually in idolatry. And why aren't they doing it? Because they heard something. I have heard and observed him, probably pointing to Jesus here. I am like a green cypress tree now, and your fruit is found in me. Well, they're no longer a dead cypress tree. They've turned green. They have grown. They've left their idolatry. So the thorn bush is not present, but the cypress is. And even though he was a bad boy before, he's no longer a bad boy because he's turned away from idolatry. He no longer has anything to do with that. Now, remember also, when Isaiah is speaking this, he's speaking it 700 years before. Before Zechariah, time. Zechariah is only about a couple hundred years behind him after they return from exile. But the idea is the cypress tree has always been existent within our world, whether it's amongst the Gentiles or whether it's amongst Israel. Okay, now we have the final everlasting sign of the everlasting covenant. We're in the millennial reign of Christ here. We need to understand that. By now, all those peoples that we see, the mountains singing, the peoples of the world clapping their hands for Israel, many of them are in the millennial kingdom. It's all changed. But there is one more sign that's very important that is mentioned here. You see, when the nation disobeyed God, the nation went into exile. And the myrtle tree is related to the exile. So now the myrtle tree is present in the land. The briar is not. The evildoer is gone. Because they were doing evil, they went into exile. So what happens? The myrtles are the returning exiles. We find these exiled trees mentioned in Zechariah chapter 1, verse 8, when he goes out there and explains his vision. So I'm going to just read the verse that they are in. They're in verse 8, mentioned at myrtle trees, which are in a ravine, and there are the watchers going out there riding horses, the angels looking around, and everything's at peace. And then you will see also that the myrtles are mentioned in verse 11. So the angel of the Lord, who was standing amongst them, the myrtle tree, said, we have patrolled the earth, and behold, all the earth is peaceful and quiet. When Israel was concluding its exile, everything was peaceful, everything was quiet. So the angel of the Lord here, sometimes people believe it's symbolic of Christ. It's a Christophany, some people think. I don't know if it is or not, but the idea, he was standing amongst the exiles when he was saying these words. But now the exiles aren't going to be amongst all the earth, they're going to be in Israel. And when Jesus sees that the thorns aren't there anymore, the briars aren't there anymore, but in place of them are the ex-idolaters and the ex ex people in exile. I'm having a hard time saying that. He is going to be reminded that he has an everlasting covenant with the nation of Israel, a covenant that benefits us Gentiles. We are blessed by it, we partake of it, and we only are going to get it when Israel comes back to him, when they see that they've run out of time and they seek the Lord, and the remaining remnant will find him. Okay, so now what? Seriously, now what? Does it really matter? What we learned today, does it really matter? Yes, it does. Let me bring one point out, and I'm sure you could bring out some of your own points from the study here. But God is going to bring Israel home. And by doing so, he brings us too. The reason why we don't have the blessings of the new covenant is Israel hasn't come home yet. When they do, when they receive their blessing, we get ours too. I want you to notice Romans 11:12. Now, if their transgression, if Israel's transgressions be riches for the world, and their failure be riches for the Gentiles, those of us who have become church members, part of the olive tree, how much more will their fulfillment be? When God gives Israel everything they're promised, we get a lot more benefit. You think you got something to look forward to now? You can count on it. God is going to bring us there. Now, replacement theology, I want to bring up here, is very dangerous. And I would invite you to consider your doctrine, because if you believe that the church replaces the nation of Israel, if you really believe that, you have a difficulty with chapters like this, because what we see is the invite went out 2,700 years ago to Israel, and the fulfillments have still yet to happen. They haven't occurred yet. So now the last question and the last application. Consider what tree you are. Ask yourself that. Are you rebellious right now? Are you fighting the Lord? What's your future? Remember, those people are going to get destroyed. Are you a briar? Briars aren't going to be in the kingdom either. Are your hands bent on doing evil? Well, maybe it's time that you seek him. You will not be in the kingdom either if you're a briar. A Jewish person today may still be in exile. They're a myrtle. Time to come home. I'm not saying go do Eliab, but come home to your God. The invitation is still there. You could still seek him. And lastly, of a tree that was represented here, I've got one more tree after that. The cypress, there's idolatry. And we think of idolatry as maybe praying to statues and all that. Well, I don't know. Maybe if you're looking at every pretty woman, you got an idolatry problem there. Maybe if you're seeking power, if you're seeking riches, maybe you're putting the Lord to the back burner. You aren't even focused on him. However, in what you're doing, if you want to glorify Jesus Christ, you do it without sinning. So where is your heart? Are you idolizing the God of Israel? Are you idolizing Jesus? Or are you idolizing things that are just vanity? Okay, the last tree I want to bring out, kind of mentioned it here, the olive tree. The olive tree is God's anointed. If you are believing in Jesus, if you are following Jesus, stay that way. But if you are none of the above, I would ask you also consider becoming an olive because Romans 11:12 told us what's going to happen. We are going to be blessed in riches when Israel's fulfillment happens. Will you be there? I would love to see you there. Now, if you can, please give me a thumbs up if you got something out of this video, or maybe comment on it or share it with somebody else. And if you haven't considered subscribing, I think the next video I'm going to do is going to be either on the woman and the leaven, or going to be on the mustard seed and the birds. So God bless you all. Thank you for joining me, and may God be active in your life, giving you streams of living water.